Would you believe that in the most frozen, unforgiving corner of the world, a wild bear didn't just act on instinct, but became a hero? Deep in the heart of Siberia, where snow falls like silence and the wind never rests, a moment unfolded in 1997 that still leaves even the most seasoned wilderness experts speechless. This isn't a myth. This isn't folklore whispered by old hunters around fires. What you're about to hear is a real story. A story of survival, of instinct, of something so rare that it defies everything we thought we knew about wild animals. Imagine this: sub-zero temperatures, snow drifts as tall as a man, and a child, just 6 years old, missing during a brutal blizzard. No food, no shelter, no visibility. Any chance of survival? Almost none. But then, a miracle wearing fur and claws stepped in. A wild bear, known to the villagers as a creature of fear and strength, did something no one expected. Instead of walking away, instead of attacking, it stayed. It chose to protect. We've all heard stories of animal rescues, dogs pulling people from floods, dolphins circling lost swimmers. But a bear in the remote Siberian taiga? This is on another level. This is about instinct transformed into empathy. A life that should have been lost, saved by a force we thought we should fear. This is not just a story about nature. It's a story about the invisible thread that sometimes connects us to the wild in the most unexpected ways. Back in 1997, in a small village lost in the endless snow fields of eastern Russia, the community was no stranger to harsh winters, but nothing prepared them for what was about to happen. A child vanished during a sudden whiteout, a little girl who had wandered just a few feet too far. Search parties braved the storm, combing the forests, calling her name into the wind. But night after night, all they found was more snow. And with every hour that passed, hope slipped further away. Until something strange happened. A hunter spotted footprints, not just the massive prints of a Siberian brown bear, but something else. Tiny ones. Barefoot, side by side. What could it mean? Was it a trail, a trap, or something even more unbelievable? In this video, we'll take you step by step through this astonishing rescue. You'll discover how a creature many see as a threat became a guardian. You'll hear first-hand accounts, traditional Siberian beliefs about animals with souls like men, and the voice of the girl who lived to tell the tale. This is not a fantasy. This is nature at its most raw, most emotional, and most real. Stories like this remind us why we're drawn to animals, not just for their power, but for their mystery. Why do some choose to harm while others choose to save? Why, in the middle of a storm, did this bear stay? Was it instinct? Was it compassion? Or something we may never truly understand? Stay with us. What happens next will not only surprise you, it might change the way you see the wild forever. It was January of 1997, the dead of winter, and the Siberian taiga had never looked more unforgiving. Snow blanketed everything like a thick white silence, smothering sound and movement. The temperature had dropped far below freezing, turning every breath into mist and every step into a struggle. In a small, forgotten village near Irkutsk, a place where time seemed to move slower, and survival was a daily ritual, a storm began to form. Locals recognized the signs. The sky darkened with unnatural speed, and the wind shifted in that eerie way that only happens before nature decides to test humanity's limits. It started as a typical morning. The villagers bundled up their children, gathered firewood, and checked on livestock before the snow thickened. But amidst that daily rhythm, a 6-year-old girl named Anya slipped out of sight. A curious child, full of energy, she had wandered only a short distance from her family's wooden cottage. No one noticed until the storm hit with full force. One moment she was playing just beyond the fence line, and the next, she was gone. The snow came down in violent waves, whipped sideways by wind that howled through the trees like wolves on the hunt. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Panic spread fast. Anya's parents were frantic, screaming her name into the blizzard as villagers grabbed lanterns, ropes, and sleds. They knew what was at stake. In Siberia, even a few minutes exposed to the elements could mean frostbite, or worse. But she was just a child, barely dressed for what was coming. Dozens of neighbors joined the search, forming lines and spreading out into the woods. They fought through knee-deep drifts, calling out over the roar of the wind, following what they thought might be footprints, only to have them swallowed up again by fresh snow. Time felt frozen. Hearts raced with dread. Every shadow under a tree looked like it might be her. Every gust of wind stole hope. They searched until nightfall, but eventually, reality set in. They had to stop. No one wanted to say the words out loud, but they all felt it. In those temperatures, with no shelter and no food, a child Anya's age wouldn't last the night. Still, some refused to give up. Her mother stood outside long after the searchers had returned, her voice raw from shouting into the storm. Inside their home, the fire burned low, and a doll Anya had left behind sat waiting on the windowsill, a silent witness to a nightmare unfolding. By the second day, authorities had been contacted, but the remoteness of the village meant help would come slowly, if at all. Siberia doesn't offer second chances. Wild predators roam those forests: wolves, lynx, and the enormous Siberian brown bear, creatures respected and feared by those who live among them. The villagers whispered old stories, passed down from the Evenki people, about bears that walk like men and guard lost souls in the snow. But these were tales for children. No one truly expected a miracle. Not out here, not in the cold. And yet, even in the face of brutal reality, hope clung to the edges of despair. Some villagers resumed the search as the storm began to ease. Others prayed. Everyone waited, hearts heavy, eyes fixed on the endless white horizon, wishing for a sign. Anything. If you're someone who believes in the raw power of nature, in real stories that go beyond logic, and in the unexplainable bond between humans and wild animals, this is where you belong. Subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss what comes next. Because what happened after that second night, what was found deep in the forest, will challenge everything you thought you knew about wild creatures. In this channel, we explore true stories of survival, of resilience, and of extraordinary encounters between people and animals. These stories matter. They need to be remembered. And this one is just getting started. As the second night descended on the village, the cold became more than just a threat. It became the enemy. The snow no longer seemed beautiful or pure. It was heavy, relentless, suffocating. Temperatures plummeted to a bone-shattering 40°C. Every surface was glazed with ice, and the silence that came with the cold was haunting. There was no wind, no footsteps, no voices calling out into the woods anymore. Just stillness, the kind of stillness that only comes when hope begins to slip through the cracks. Inside Anya's home, the fireplace flickered weakly. Her mother sat motionless, wrapped in blankets, holding the tiny wool hat Anya had been wearing earlier that week. Her father hadn't spoken in hours. He stared out the frosted window, eyes scanning the tree line for a shape, a shadow, a sign, anything that meant his daughter was still alive. But there was nothing, not even footprints. The fresh snowfall had wiped away all traces of the little girl's path, like nature had tried to erase her from the world. Volunteers gathered again at dawn, but their numbers were fewer. Some villagers, hardened by years of surviving in this brutal climate, began to speak of closure. Not because they didn't care, but because they had seen this before. A child missing in the taiga for more than 48 hours was never found alive. It was a silent agreement, the kind no one dares to say out loud, but the looks in their eyes said enough. Despair had settled in, and the forest, so quiet now, felt like it had already chosen its verdict. The men who returned to search wore expressions that hovered between duty and mourning. They brought dogs this time, trained to follow scent, but the animals were restless, confused. They sniffed the air, whined, and refused to go further into the woods. As the sun climbed higher, their paws trembled on the icy ground. Some said it was fear. Others said it was something else, something unexplainable. but none of them could deny that the dogs sensed something strange in the trees. Reports of wolf sightings began to surface. Hunters had noticed fresh tracks near the eastern ridge, prints that were wide, deep, and moved in packs. The wolves were hungry. In winters, this harsh, even apex predators became desperate, and everyone knew what that meant. The possibility that Anya might have survived the cold only made that thought more unbearable. A 6-year-old child, alone, with wolves nearby. It wasn't just chilling, it was torment. The forest was alive with unseen eyes. Locals whispered about how the trees remembered things, how the land was sacred, and how some animals, especially the great Siberian brown bears, held an ancient wisdom that humans had long forgotten. Of course, those were just old stories. Warnings passed down by the Evenki elders to remind children not to stray too far. But in moments like this, when reality bends under the weight of helplessness, even the skeptics start to wonder. Could there be something more out there? Something watching? That night, the temperature dropped even lower. A deathly cold settled over the valley. The moonlight bounced off the snow like silver blades, and a quiet frost formed along the windows. No one slept. Inside the houses, parents clung tighter to their children, and Anya's room, untouched since her disappearance, seemed frozen in time. Her slippers still by the door, her drawing half finished on the table. Her absence hung in the air like smoke, filling every corner with a heaviness no one could shake. Even the most rational minds started to feel it, that haunting sense that something beyond their understanding was unfolding. This wasn't just a case of a missing child anymore. It was turning into a test of hope, of faith, of the hidden forces that move through wild places when no one is watching. The next morning would bring something unexpected. A trail, a sign. Something small, but powerful enough to stir the searchers back to life. But at this moment, all anyone had was silence, cold, and the growing certainty that Anya had become one with the snow. Still, the forest had not given up its secrets. Not yet. And out there, beneath a canopy of ice-covered trees, something was stirring. Something wild, something ancient, something that was not done with her story. 3 days had passed since the storm swallowed little Anya into the icy wilderness. 3 nights of hopeless silence, of bitter cold pressing against the hearts of her parents, of villagers preparing themselves for the worst. But while the world around them seemed to freeze, deep in the snow-covered taiga, something was moving. Something that didn't follow logic. Something ancient and untamed. On the morning of the 3rd day, a man named Mikhail, an experienced tracker and hunter, born and raised in those forests, set out alone. He was known in the village for his silence and skill, a man who could read the land like a language. While others had given up or remained trapped in grief, Mikhail believed the forest had more to say. He trusted his instincts, and the signs the snow might leave behind. The sun was weak as it filtered through a thick sky, casting only the palest glow on the endless white landscape. His boots crunched with each careful step, and his eyes scanned for patterns others had missed. Then just beyond the frozen bend of the Irkutsk River, he saw something strange. A set of heavy tracks that broke the uniform surface of the snow. They were unmistakable. Bear tracks. Wide. Deep. Fresh. But beside them, smaller, almost invisible, were a second set of prints. Tiny. Light. Human. Barefoot. Mikhail's breath caught in his throat. He knelt down, running a gloved hand gently across the snow. The prints were too small to belong to anyone but a child, and they weren't dragging like they would be if someone had been crawling. They were walking, steady, step by step. His heart began to race, not from fear, but from the impossible realization that these prints were recent. They hadn't been there 2 days ago. He followed them without hesitation, weaving through frost-covered pines and over frozen terrain that few dared to cross alone. The wind had dropped. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. The tracks led him to a place the Evenki elders called the Sleeping Hollow, a natural dip in the land sheltered by tall birch and pine trees, often used by animals during extreme weather. And there, Almost camouflaged by nature itself, he saw a mound of snow that had been gently disturbed, melted from within by body heat. He crept forward, breath shallow, rifle forgotten at his side. What he saw next would change his life forever. Nestled inside a shallow den, carved just under a low snowbank, was a massive Siberian brown bear. Curled up, eyes half closed, its fur dusted with snowflakes. And beside this beast, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, was Anya, the same 6-year-old girl they had all believed lost to the cold. Her small frame was curled against the bear's side, her cheek resting on its thick fur, her breathing shallow, but steady. Mikhail froze, not from fear, but from awe. The bear didn't move. It simply watched him, eyes calm, as if it had been expecting someone to arrive. For several long seconds, nothing happened. No aggression, no growl. Just a silent moment between man, beast, and miracle. Anya stirred slightly, her lips pale and cracked, her skin flushed with the cold, but she was alive, protected, and somehow, impossibly, warmed by the creature feared by all who roamed those woods. The hunter took a step back, careful not to break whatever fragile balance had formed. He whispered her name once, then again. Her eyes fluttered open, just for a second, enough to see a familiar face. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She only mouthed the word mama and closed her eyes again. Mikhail knew he had to act fast. Slowly, with more reverence than he had ever shown any living thing, he reached in and lifted Anya's frail body from the hollow. The bear still didn't move. It watched, then lowered its head into the snow, as if returning to sleep, as if its job was done. Tell me, would you believe a bear could protect a human child? If you had been in Mikhail's place, staring into the eyes of that wild creature, feeling the warmth of the girl still alive in its den, what would you have thought? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you believe this was. Pure instinct? A twist of fate? Or something deeper that we still don't understand? Because this is not the end of the story. Not even close. Anya's journey was only beginning, and what happened after Mikhail brought her home would raise even more questions. About survival, connection, and the mysterious compassion of the wild. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover next might change everything you thought you knew about nature. Mikhail stood frozen in the snow, cradling the fragile weight of the girl who should not have survived. Anya's body, though chilled to the bone, radiated the undeniable warmth of life. Her breath was shallow but present, her eyelashes dusted with ice, her skin pale yet marked with the soft flush of survival. In that surreal silence of the Siberian forest, time felt suspended. Just a man, a child, and a creature that by all logic should have devoured her, not saved her. But logic had no place here. Something ancient had taken its place. The bear, an enormous male by the size of its frame, with fur thick and coarse from the brutal winter, remained perfectly still as Mikhail lifted Anya. Its eyes locked onto his, not with threat, but with something almost impossible to describe. A heavy stillness, a knowing calm. The bear did not growl. It did not lunge. It did not defend its space. It merely watched, eyes dark and reflective, as if understanding this moment carried weight beyond the wild's natural order. Mikhail knew not to turn his back, yet he also felt no danger. He stepped back carefully, keeping his eyes on the beast. Still, the bear made no move. When he finally turned and began the slow, cautious walk out of the den with Anya pressed tightly to his chest, the forest held its breath. Every crunch of his boots in the snow was a heartbeat, a reminder that life, even in its most fragile form, can sometimes defy death when the wild decides to show mercy. By the time Mikhail reached the nearest search party, camped along the ridgeline a few kilometers away, his face was pale and streaked with frost. The men gathered around him, stunned into silence. One of them dropped to his knees when he saw Anya's face. They had given up. They had assumed this was no longer a rescue mission. It was recovery. But here she was, alive, They wrapped her in every coat, blanket, and spare layer they had. Someone lit a fire on the spot. Another ran for the sleds. Her mother, when she arrived just minutes later, fell to the ground at the sight of her daughter. There are no words for what she felt in that moment, only the sound, a sound like grief breaking apart to make room for hope again. Anya didn't wake right away, but her fingers twitched. Her lips moved. She was holding on. What the rescue team struggled to understand was how. How could she have survived 3 days in sub-zero temperatures without shelter or food? How could she have walked barefoot into a blizzard and emerged alive? Mikhail told them about the tracks, about the den, about the bear. At first, no one believed him. Bears don't save children. Bears kill to eat, to protect territory. They aren't gentle. They aren't selfless. They don't choose to watch a child freeze in their den instead of treating her as prey. But the story didn't change, and neither did the facts. Doctors later confirmed that Anya's core body temperature had remained above the lethal threshold for hypothermia. That was impossible, unless some external heat source had protected her. Her frostbite was minimal. There were no signs of scratches, no defensive wounds, no trauma typical of wild animal contact. In fact, the fur fibers found on her clothing matched the brown bear species that roamed the forest surrounding the village. As much as it sounded like legend, it was real. Every detail pointed to one extraordinary truth. This bear had not only spared her life, it had preserved it. But perhaps the most unbelievable part of all was what happened after. When the search party, now fueled with adrenaline and awe, returned to the site to investigate the den, they found the snow undisturbed. No signs of the bear remained. No paw prints, no claw marks on the trees. The creature that had shared its shelter with Anya had vanished, melting into the forest like a ghost of the taiga, never seen again. The villagers, once skeptics, began to talk in hushed tones about what had happened. Some called it divine intervention. Others believed it was the spirit of the forest, taking the form of a bear to protect one of their own. The Evenki elders spoke again of the Medved Kranitelia, the guardian bear from their ancestral stories. A protector, a watcher, a being that appears only in moments of pure need, then disappears without a trace. Scientists might call it anomaly. Locals would call it miracle. But for Anya's mother and every person who stood around that fire holding their breath as she clung to life, it was something more. It was a reminder that even in the coldest, harshest corners of the earth, compassion sometimes wears the face of the unexpected. And still, questions remained. Why had the bear spared her? Why hadn't it attacked? Why had it let her go so easily, as if it knew its role was never to harm, but to guard? As rescuers looked back toward the forest line that evening, they wondered if it still watched from the trees, not as a predator, but as a witness, as a secret keeper of a story that no one could explain and that few would ever believe. But Anya believed. She would always remember that silent guardian of the snow. And what came next, when she opened her eyes, when she finally spoke, would make this already unbelievable story even more extraordinary. When Anya finally opened her eyes, it was not in the forest, nor in the snow-covered den, but in a dimly lit hospital room in Irkutsk. The windows were fogged with the breath of winter, and everything smelled faintly of antiseptic and wood smoke. She was wrapped in thick blankets, and the heat from the nearby radiator seeped into her bones like sunlight through frost. For a few seconds, she didn't understand where she was. Her lips were too dry to speak, her body too heavy to move, but her mind, her memory, was awake. The nurses called for her mother the moment they saw her stir. Her mother rushed into the room, sobbing with relief, and held her daughter's hand like it was the last piece of the world she'd been trying to hold on to. Doctors stood nearby, amazed, not just because Anya had survived the kind of cold that could stop a man's heart in minutes, but because her body told a story science couldn't fully explain. She had no bruises, no scratches, no internal trauma. Her condition, while critical, was remarkably clean. Severe dehydration, mild hypothermia, sunken eyes, cracked lips, but no signs of attack, no broken bones, no animal aggression. It didn't make sense, and yet, it had happened. When they asked Anya what she remembered, her voice was barely a whisper, but her words were clear. "Something warm," she said. It breathed, it hummed. She recalled lying down on snow so cold it felt like burning, too tired to cry, too tired to move. But then, the warmth came. A giant shape, a presence beside her that didn't speak, didn't hurt, didn't leave. She remembered its breath, heavy and slow, blowing against her cheek like the rhythm of the earth itself. And she remembered pressing her fingers into thick fur, clinging to it like a blanket sent from the sky. The doctors exchanged glances. Mikhail had told them everything, about the den, the bear, the moment of eye contact he'd never forget. Now, the girl's memory lined up perfectly. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't shock. She hadn't imagined the warmth. It had been real. The hospital ran blood tests, scans, vital checks, and again the facts came back strange but consistent. She had somehow retained just enough core temperature to stay alive. The only explanation that held was the bear's body heat. Massive Siberian brown bears during winter carry layers of fat and fur capable of generating enormous warmth, more than enough to sustain another living body pressed against them. And Anya had spent nearly 40 hours in direct contact with one. No one had a name for what had happened. Was it instinct? Had the bear mistaken her for one of its own? Or was there something deeper happening beneath the surface of wild behavior? Some buried wisdom passed down through generations of survival in the snow. Could animals, in moments beyond survival, choose compassion? Her mother believed so. She was chosen, she told the doctors. The forest didn't take her. It protected her. Villagers whispered of ancient spirits, of bear guardians, of old stories coming to life in the most unexpected way. And even the skeptics found themselves quieted, unsure how to dismiss a truth so gentle, so impossible. Anya didn't speak much after waking, but she did draw, and one of her first pictures was of a bear, not snarling, not roaring, but curled beside a girl under falling snow. A soft red scarf draped across her shoulders, a blue eye peeking open. Her mother framed the drawing and hung it above their fireplace, saying, "That's the spirit that watched over her. That's who we thank." If this story moved you, if you felt even a spark of hope in the middle of all this cold and silence, tap the like button. These are the kinds of stories that remind us there's still magic in the wild, and your like helps others find that same spark, that same reminder that nature, as harsh as it can be, sometimes opens its arms. But Anya's journey didn't end in that hospital bed. What happened next, what she saw in the weeks that followed, and the way her life unfolded after surviving the impossible, would reveal that her connection to the bear, to that moment, to the forest itself, had only just begun. Word of Anya's survival spread quickly, moving from whispers in the hospital corridors to radio broadcasts, and soon into the hands of researchers and scientists who had spent their careers studying animal behavior, especially that of apex predators in remote and hostile regions like Siberia. What had happened in that forest, a child lying beside a wild bear and waking up unharmed, wasn't just rare. It was unheard of. The moment her story was confirmed, zoologists and wildlife biologists from across Russia and beyond began to weigh in. Everyone wanted to understand the same thing. Why didn't the bear harm her? The most conservative voices suggested a theory rooted in timing. They proposed that the bear, likely a male Siberian brown bear, had only just emerged from hibernation and was still sluggish, disoriented, and not yet driven by hunger. Hibernation, after all, drastically reduces a bear's metabolic functions. Their heartbeats slow, their body temperatures drop, their aggression levels are suppressed. A bear in this state might have instinctively conserved energy, avoiding confrontation or movement unless absolutely necessary. And Anya, being small, quiet, and unmoving, may not have registered as a threat, or even as prey. But others weren't satisfied with that explanation. Survivalists pointed out that even semi-conscious bears are notoriously territorial. Entering a bear's den is considered one of the most dangerous mistakes a human can make. And yet, Anya hadn't entered. She had been welcomed. Or so it seemed. There were no signs of struggle, No defensive wounds, no signs that the bear had even attempted to push her away. Instead, what Anya described, a soft, breathing presence, fur like a blanket, warmth shared in silence, hinted at something that defied pure biology. That's when the conversation shifted away from science and into something deeper. Elders from the indigenous Evenki tribes were among the first to offer a different perspective. These are people whose ancestors have lived in harmony with the taiga for generations. To them, bears are not simply animals. They are keepers of balance, beings to be respected, even revered. In Evenki spiritual tradition, some bears are said to carry the souls of ancestors, especially those who return to protect the vulnerable, the innocent, the lost. They don't speak of this lightly. Stories passed down through oral history tell of times when children vanished into storms or forests, only to return days later, claiming a great bear kept them safe, guided them home, or even carried them across frozen rivers. These weren't bedtime tales. They were sacred teachings, meant to remind younger generations of the power and mystery that lives within the wilderness. And after Anya's rescue, those stories came alive again. The Evenki people were invited to speak with Anya and her family. One elder, wearing a fur-lined coat that seemed as old as the forest itself, gently laid a hand on the girl's head and said only one word, Kranitelya, guardian. That word spread like wildfire. Within days, the media began referring to the bear as Medved Kranitelya, the guardian bear. News outlets picked up the phrase. Journalists began using it in headlines. Local newspapers printed sketches of a giant bear watching over a sleeping child. Children in the village began painting images of the guardian bear in school. And what had started as an inexplicable encounter in the snow soon became legend. Even biologists who dismissed spiritual explanations admitted they'd never encountered anything like this. The odds of survival were practically zero. And yet, not only had Anya survived, but she had done so with a memory of warmth, of breath, of safety, emotions we rarely, if ever, associate with the wild. Her vitals had stabilized quickly. Her body was healing. But her spirit had already begun to shift. She started asking questions no one could answer. Why her? Why didn't the bear leave? Why did it feel familiar? Her drawings continued, always the same image. The great bear curled beside her, always calm, always protective. She called it her forest friend, and said it wasn't scary. It was lonely, it was waiting for something too. The media's focus eventually drifted to other headlines, but in Anya's village, and among the Evenki, the guardian bear became more than a story. It became a symbol of compassion without words, of protection beyond logic, of the unspoken connection between human and animal. Children no longer feared the forest the way they once did. They spoke of it with awe. Some families even left small offerings of berries and pine cones near the forest's edge, as a gesture of gratitude, just in case the guardian still watched from the shadows. And while debates continued in academic circles, something far more powerful had already taken root: belief. A belief that nature, though fierce and wild and often cruel, also carries the capacity for mercy, for intention, for the kind of unexpected kindness that reshapes everything we think we know about instinct and survival. And yet, there was still more to come. Anya's recovery had only just begun, physically and emotionally. But in the quiet of those winter nights, with fire crackling beside her and her mother humming old lullabies, the forest was never far from her mind. She would wake with dreams of paws in the snow, of glowing eyes, of deep breathing that matched the rhythm of her heart. Something inside her had been permanently changed, and soon, the world would begin to see just how deep that connection had grown. Years passed, but the memory never faded. The snow that nearly claimed Anya's life became, in her heart, something sacred. While others saw it as a place of danger, a brutal reminder of how cold and merciless the wilderness can be, Anya saw it differently. To her, the forest was not a graveyard of fear, but a guardian in disguise. It had tested her, yes, but it had also protected her. She grew up in the same village, surrounded by the same trees that once swallowed her whole, and every day that passed only deepened her quiet connection to the wild. As she matured, Anya's fascination with animals intensified. But it wasn't fueled by curiosity alone. It was driven by reverence. She wanted to understand the wild not as something separate from us, but as something we are still very much a part of. She began studying wildlife biology at the university in Irkutsk, focusing her research on large carnivores of the Russian taiga: wolves, lynx, and of course bears, especially the Siberian brown bear, the very creature that had once shared its den with her, changing the course of her life forever. Her professors noted something rare in her. It wasn't just intelligence or dedication. It was a calm she carried with her, a stillness in her voice when she spoke of predators, an empathy that seemed too vast for someone so young. Anya never tried to turn her story into fame. She didn't write books. She didn't appear on talk shows. But when she spoke of what happened, she spoke with clarity, and always ended her retelling with the same line: "I was given life twice, first by birth, and then by the forest." To this day, Anya returns to that same stretch of woodland near Irkutsk every winter, on the same date the storm had pulled her away from the world. She walks deep into the taiga, alone just as the snow begins to fall. She stops at a clearing not marked on any map, at the base of an old pine tree whose roots reach wide and deep into the frozen soil. There she lays down offerings: wild berries, dried fish, a few pieces of sweet bread. Not for humans, not for show, but for him, the one she still feels watching, the one who, in her words, never stopped keeping guard. Locals often ask her why she continues the ritual. Some say it's for healing, others believe it's tradition, but she always gives the same soft answer with a smile that holds 1,000 memories. "Because I made a promise, and I don't break promises." She says she still dreams of the bear. Sometimes she hears it breathing when she's alone in the woods. Sometimes she sees its shape in the shadows between the trees. Not haunting, not chasing, just being. Present, protective. There's no fear in her when she walks the forest floor, only gratitude. Her work today focuses on wildlife conservation and human-animal relationships. She advocates for respect toward nature, not fear, not dominance, but balance, harmony. She teaches that animals are not our enemies, even the large and dangerous ones, especially the large and dangerous ones. And when students or journalists ask her what inspired her to choose this path, she often hesitates. Then she tells them the story, the real story. And they listen, silent and wide-eyed, as she speaks not of survival, but of connection. There's something extraordinary about people who carry secrets the world can't quite explain. Anya walks through life with the knowledge of a miracle that most would dismiss as impossible. But she doesn't need the world to believe her. She doesn't need science to confirm it or myths to justify it. The truth lives in her bones, in her breath, in the memory of warmth in the coldest place on earth. And now I want to ask you, where in the world are you watching this story from? Drop it in the comments below. Tell me if this story reminds you of something you've heard, or if you've ever witnessed a miracle like this. Because even in a world full of noise, stories like this bring us back to what matters most, the invisible threads that connect us, to nature, to each other, and sometimes to something much greater than we can understand. At the edge of the forest, where the birch trees thin and the wind carries the scent of pine and snow, there is a place that doesn't appear on any official map. It's not a tourist destination. No roads lead there. It exists quietly, far from noise and curiosity, surrounded by the same silence that once nearly swallowed a little girl's life. This is the place where instinct surrendered to compassion, where survival bowed to something higher. Today, nestled just beside the natural slope of the land that once held a snow den, stands a simple wooden marker, aged by years of harsh winters, but still standing firm against the wind. Etched into the grain with quiet reverence are the words, "Here, in 1997, a bear chose kindness over instinct." Locals call it the guardian's den now. Children are brought there in the summer by their grandparents, not to scare them with tales of the wild, but to teach them something older than fear: respect. The elders speak of it softly, almost as a prayer. Hikers who pass near that area often report feeling a strange stillness there, like the trees themselves are listening, remembering. No animals are hunted near that ground. It's understood, even by the most pragmatic villagers, that this is hallowed land. For Anya, that spot is more than sacred. It is the place where everything changed. She visits it alone, always in winter, always quietly. She brings the same offerings every year, places them beneath the gnarled roots of the old pine tree that seems to watch over the cave like a sentinel. There's no ceremony, no candles, just her, the snow, and the weight of memory. She sits for hours without speaking, sometimes sketching in a notebook, sometimes just listening to the forest breathe. She once described the experience as returning to the arms of the earth itself. That cave, hidden beneath layers of snow, has become a kind of shrine, not built by hands but shaped by story. And while the forest has tried to reclaim it over time, the wooden sign remains. People from other parts of Siberia, and even foreign travelers who hear whispers of the legend, occasionally seek it out. Some leave behind small tokens, a hand-carved bear, a bundle of dried herbs, or a folded note in a different language. All are left in silence. There is no guide, no instructions, only reverence. The local government, after years of hearing the story circulate through communities and regional news, quietly designated the area as a wildlife preservation zone. No construction is allowed within several kilometers of the den. It's a rare move in a region that often favors utility over folklore, but no one opposed it. In fact, most felt it was long overdue. Something happened there that even time can't bury. To this day, biologists, ethologists, and behaviorists continue to discuss Anya's story in academic circles. Some use it to illustrate the unpredictable nature of animal behavior. Others reference it as an outlier, a statistical anomaly in the behavioral data of large predators. But a growing number of researchers are beginning to use different words: interspecies empathy, cooperative survival, emotional mirroring. These are terms once considered speculative, even taboo, but not anymore. Because once a wild bear protects a child, and that child grows up to protect wildlife in return, something changes, not just in the story, but in the science, in the way we see the wild, in the way we define instinct, in the way we draw the line between what is natural and what is possible. Anya once said during an interview, "I don't need the world to believe what happened. I was there. I felt him breathe. I remember how warm it was in that cave. That wasn't survival. That was mercy. And mercy doesn't always come from where we expect it." Her words echoed beyond that conversation. They found their way into conservation campaigns, documentaries, and even school textbooks that explore the emotional complexity of animals. Her voice, soft but certain, became a symbol of something larger than herself, a reminder that the line between human and animal is not always as thick as we imagine, that the wilderness we fear may also be capable of love in a language we have simply forgotten how to hear. And now, whenever someone walks the edge of that quiet forest and finds that wooden sign, they're not just reading a sentence carved into wood. They're touching a living memory, one that continues to ripple outward with each retelling. A story that reminds us the wild isn't always savage, that sometimes when no one is watching, nature chooses grace over hunger. Still, that sign doesn't tell the whole tale. There's more, because what happened in the forest didn't end in that cave, and Anya's bond with that silent guardian would soon take an even deeper turn. There are stories that fade with time, softened by memory and buried beneath the weight of disbelief. And then there are stories like Anya's, stories that linger, that echo, that carve themselves into the snow and into the hearts of those willing to listen. Stories that refuse to be forgotten. Because they aren't just stories about survival, they're stories about connection, about the invisible thread that sometimes, somehow pulls two completely different beings, one human, one wild, into the same heartbeat, into the same shelter, into the same moment of unexpected grace. Nature, as we know, is unpredictable. It can be harsh, unforgiving. It tests our limits, reminds us of our fragility, of how small we really are beneath the weight of mountains and the silence of forests. But sometimes, in the midst of all that wildness, it surprises us. It shows us mercy, compassion. It chooses kindness, not because it has to, but because it can. If you've made it this far, if your heart felt heavier and then lighter through Anya's journey, if you saw yourself reflected in that girl or even in that bear, then maybe you're meant to be here. Maybe this space, this story, this channel is part of your journey too. And that's why your presence matters. When you subscribe to this channel, you're not just following for the next video. You're joining a growing circle of people who believe that animals are more than instinct, that the wild is more than survival, that sometimes, in the quietest corners of the earth, something extraordinary happens, and it deserves to be remembered. So if this story stirred something in you, if it made you feel hope, wonder, awe, or even tears, become part of our journey. Click subscribe now. Join this family of people who care deeply about animals, about true stories that make us stop and think, and about the mysterious beauty of nature that continues to teach us things no textbook ever could. And don't go just yet, because the next story is already waiting for you, just one click away. A story just as wild, just as real, and just as powerful. Who knows? It might just restore your faith in the impossible.